There's two sides to every story. The defeat of the pain of the glory. It all burns away. But how did it go so wrong? Now it's all gone.
Resident Evil Village. It has been exactly 2 months since the game released on PS4, Xbox One, PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X. In those 2 months, I've been repeatedly playing through the game, even to go as far as to platinum it just so this review could be as accurate as possible. See, it doesn't take a detective to figure out I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, and I've been anticipating the release of RE8 ever since it was announced. Even though we were never shown how the game would play and what the main story would be about, we still didn't know much, which got me even more excited for the game. And alas, on May 7th, 2021, my dad gave me a $75 PSN card, which I used to purchase both Resident Evil Village and the original game which started it all on the PS Vita. So 2 months later, after I've played this game to death, what do I finally think of it? Well, there's no point in trying to keep my opinion a secret since you can see the title of this video is overwhelmingly positive. So yeah, I fucking love this game. I genuinely didn't know what to expect going in, and what I got was a special entry in the series. As I'm writing this, I don't even know how to articulate the feeling this game gives me. The best way I can explain it is to say I haven't felt this way about an RE game since Code Veronica. It's a game that you don't expect to be a part of the Resident Evil universe, and yet it works so well. But enough fanboying, let's actually get into Resident Evil Village. Like I said earlier, there's a lot I want to talk about, and because of that, I don't know where to start. So let's go with presentation. As some of you may know, I am not an expert when it comes to creating models, engines, and whatnot. I know a little more than the average person, but I don't know enough. However, I'll try to articulate the best I can. This game is gorgeous. Using the impressive RE engine that Resident Evil 7, 2 Remake, and 3 Remake used, this game looks beautiful. When it comes to the human models, with no exaggeration, these are the best human models I've ever seen. You can see so much detail by looking at a single hand. It's insane how graphics have come such a long way. Now, I haven't played any PS5 games or even a good amount of highly rated PS4 games, so I'm not going to go as far as to claim Resident Evil Village has the best graphics ever. But I will confidently say it has the best graphics I've ever seen personally. This 720p compressed YouTube quality doesn't do it justice, but take my word. And keep in mind, this is the PS4 port of the game I'm talking about. God knows what the PS5 version must look like. And when it comes to the environments, there are so many different places that all have their own look and feel to it. Their own personality that, in a way, kind of reflects the villain that inhabits it. You have the overrun village, the elegant but haunting Castle de Metresque, the misleadingly beautiful House of Benviento, the messy and disgusting swamp Monroe resides in, and the super industrial and chaotic factory that belongs to Heisenberg. Each of these individual environments are built with so much care and class to them, especially Castle de Metresque and Heisenberg's factory. Now with the positive out of the way, I do want to nitpick a little. I don't know if this is a visual error only found in last-gen versions of the game, but when it comes to textures, it feels like they're always rendering in as you pass certain objects. What I mean is if you stop for a second in the game and pay attention, you will see textures popping in around you. Now this is a very subtle issue that you likely won't notice at all, but I thought it would be unfair if I didn't point it out. To the game's credit, it has an abundance of places to explore with next to no loading screens, so they're understandably going to have to render the environments as you're going along. So in short, this game is visually incredible. All of the models for the monsters and humans you'll meet look incredible, the game builds its environments with care, and there are issues like dropping frames or crashes that I've never experienced. So on top of being a beautiful game, it's a beautiful game that doesn't sacrifice your enjoyment of it with game-breaking bugs. Any gamer would tell you that that is a rarity. Also, I've yet to even mention the soundtrack. This is easily one of my favorite soundtracks in the series. Code Veronica has it beat, but if it wasn't for that game, then this would easily be my favorite soundtrack in the series. The music does an incredible job at complementing whatever situation Ethan is currently in, whether it's fighting off a dragon, running from a giant fish boy, or battling Megatron. This game sounds wonderful. And don't get me started on that Yearning for Dark Shadows track. It is on par with Go Tell Aunt Rhody from Resident Evil 7. Two amazing songs. So, with the presentation out of the way, let's get into the real meat of things, the gameplay. Now, even after playing Resident Evil Village for 2 months, I still haven't played Resident Evil 7 yet. I will at one point, but because of that, I do not know what is entirely new to this game or not because this was my first introduction to first-person Resident Evil. Starting off with what I'm sure was an RE7, you have your basic inventory, key items you can collect to get through puzzles, a new collection of weapons you unlock as you progress through the game, and first aid meds which you can find. Now, I would be lying if I said I didn't miss the herbs from the previous games. The first aid med system is not that bad, but it doesn't hit the same, you know? Oh, and also returning is a block system where if an enemy attacks you while you're blocking, you not only won't get stunned, but you'll minimize the amount of damage you take. This sounds silly, even for a Resident Evil game, but this is actually a neat mechanic that adds another layer to the combat. Now with the returning stuff out of the way, let's start with the things I know are new. But to start off, you have a crafting system. If you collect enough resources, you can craft ammo for any weapon you currently have, or just first aid meds. This system is such a great addition. Some might look at this and say this takes away from the satisfaction of finding ammunition and first aid meds like what you would do in a previous Resident Evil game, but for a more action-heavy entry like this crafting system is not a bad idea, and you'll likely be exploring for resources to help you craft something you need. Not only that, but you have to think about what you want to craft because this game doesn't just throw crafting materials at you. This mechanic gives the player more options on how to manage their resources, and I feel it's a pretty underrated feature. Another big part of the game, no pun intended, is the Duke, a merchant who's inspired from the one we saw in Resident Evil 4. The sheer amount of replayability this one guy adds to the entire game is nearly immeasurable. You can purchase a variety of items from him such as a gun attachments to increase the weapon's efficiency, first aid meds, and crafting recipes that allow you to craft more useful things such as explosives and different types of ammunition. The currency you use to purchase these items is lei, which you can obtain by either collecting it from the ground or from fallen enemies. Another way to earn lei is to sell treasures which you can find around the places you explore, or, like lei, off of fallen enemies. When I first found out combat was going to reward you with goods, I was turned off by the idea. Resident Evil has always been about punishing you for engaging in too much combat, so I was worried this game was straying away from survival horror. I love Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, but after I heard 7 was a nice return to the series' roots, I was expecting Resident Evil 8 to continue doing what made the original so engaging. However, even though this game is in no way a survival horror game, it is by all means a really fun action game with plenty of horror elements. And this lei system helps bring more incentive to combat and engaging in side quests. My favorite part about the Duke is the upgrade system. You can spend lei to upgrade multiple aspects of your different weapons. On your first run, you're going to realize there's no way you can upgrade each and every one of your guns fully, but it turns out you can load up your completed save and replay the game with all of your unlockable weapons with more opportunities to increase their power further. This adds an abundance of replayability, especially when you unlock special weapons, which I will get to later. Another addition of the Duke is the cooking feature. There are multiple animals scattered throughout the village, and after you've killed them, you can collect different ingredients and give them to the Duke, who will prepare a meal containing an upgrade. These upgrades will do things like increase your movement speed, give you extra health, make your blocks more powerful, etc. Again, replayability at its finest. Speaking of that, I should go over the CP system. As a reward for doing in-game challenges, and trust me, there's a lot of them, you gain points in the menu that you can use to purchase a huge variety of unlockables. This includes things like concept art, in-game models, new weapons, and infinite ammo for specific guns. At this point, I sound like a broken record, but there is so much to do in this game. Now earlier, I mentioned special weapons. Well, similar to previous entries, you can get special weapons by doing a specific task. By beating hardcore difficulty, you unlock the hand cannon PZ. By beating Village of Shadows, you get the rocket pistol, and by getting a double S rank on every Mercenary stage, you get a fucking lightsaber. Now admittedly, 2 of these special weapons are pretty lackluster, and those 2 weapons are rewards for playing the main game. The hand cannon PZ, while promising on its own, is just a slightly more powerful Wolfsbane. It would be better if the weapon didn't have to be fully upgraded, but it does. However, the rocket pistol is a way bigger letdown, especially since you have to beat the hardest difficulty of the game in order to get it. On the bright side, you don't have to upgrade it, but you'll soon be wishing you could. While it has a wide range of stun when shot at a group of enemies, the damage output is pathetic compared to the other weapons. If you fully upgraded the Wolfsbane and unlocked infinite ammo for it, which mind you, is a weapon you gain access to in any run of the game, there is no reason to go for these two weapons. Here's a question: what happened to the infinite rocket launcher? It's the most iconic reward in the series, so why did we get stuck with this rocket pistol? All of that aside, the lightsaber is a pretty good melee weapon. It's nearly always an insta-kill, serves multiple functions, and it's a fucking lightsaber. However, let's talk about what you have to play to get it. The Mercenaries. A revamped version of Mercenaries seen in older titles. When this got revealed at the RE showcase, I was surprised they were bringing it back, but I didn't really care for it. However, you had to get an S rank on all of the stages for the Platinum, so I started it up and I was surprised by how well this mode played. I had a lot of fun on the first 4 stages. I was planning out new strategies, trying new things, remembering enemy spawns, and doing whatever else necessary to get that glorious double S rank. Then the 5th stage happened, and all of my excitement to continue playing the mode was taken away when I saw I had to replay all of the stages over again, but this time with barely any good weapons and tougher enemies as a cherry on top. And this is what happened to my headset as a result. It wasn't even the difficulty that made me so mad, it was the fact I had to replay stages I already beat just to get that damn trophy. If I didn't think Star Wars was cool, I likely would have gave up on getting the lightsaber right there. Why are we recycling content in a game mode that's already recycled content? Regardless, I persevered and I got a double S rank on all 8 stages, and all it cost me was a Turtle Beach headset. Overall, I admittedly liked the Mercenaries. It was unexpectedly a fun mode. Just be prepared for an ass whooping if you're going after that lightsaber. Now, in the broader sense of how the game plays, after a prologue, you are thrusted into the crazy world of Resident Evil Village. Like typical Resident Evil games, you'll unlock weaponry as you progress and you'll need to use the resources wisely. Now, if puzzle solving is what you mainly like about Resident Evil, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint. While there are tiny puzzles scattered throughout the game, they will take like a second to figure out. It's to the point where I'm questioning whether I should even call them puzzles. Now, one thing I really like about this game is it technically is divided into 6 sections. The introduction to the village, Castle de Metresque, Benviento's house, Monroe's little hideout, Heisenberg's factory, and the climax. The middle 4 are very unique and each serve to offer something different. Castle de Metresque is the section that caters the most to classic RE fans. You have your huge building you have to explore, it has the most puzzles, and it has a nemesis-type stalker hunting you down in the form of Cassandra and Lady Dimitrescu. After that is House Benviento. This section ditches combat and goes for pure horror. At first it has you solving basic puzzles while trying to build up suspense to something horrific. And sure enough, you encounter this abomination. This is how you do horror. After that section is Monroe's Hideout, which is the shortest section in the game and doesn't really offer much. It's short and intense, and then after that you have Heisenberg's section, which I feel caters to fans of the action-packed entries such as Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. It has a huge emphasis on combat and over-the-top mechanical creatures. Speaking of which, let's get into enemy types. The enemy you'll be encountering the most are the Lycans, werewolf-like creatures who are typically found in groups. I personally love these guys. They are fast, hard to hit on harder difficulties, and they look sick. And then there are these guys whose names I cannot pronounce. Less interesting enemies typically equipped with sickles who are slow, easy to deal with, and are uninteresting to fight. Semkas are whatever. They're flying guys who are easy to deal with but a little annoying to hit at times. Going over to the factory, there are the Haulers, who move and act just like the typical vampire-like creatures. The only difference is that these guys have cool mechanical things over their eyes. Just when you thought the enemy variety was stale, you have the Soldats. Tough-ass enemies that come in many different shapes and sizes. You have the Soldat Ares, the Soldat Jet, and the Soldat Panzer who are hulking monstrosities. I love the way they look, and they help make the factory a more exciting place to play through. Going over the sub-bosses, you have the 3 Daughters in Castle Dimitrescu who help shake things up every now and then, and they aren't hard to fight. There's my personal favorite, the Varkolax, who are a more traditional version of the werewolves. They're big, mean, terrifying, and take a considerable amount of damage to kill. There's the Urias, who you'll encounter a total of 3 times across the game. It's crude as just RE8's version of Executioner Magini from Resident Evil 5, but I'm not complaining. He's an alright sub-boss that serves as an epic encounter in Chris Redfield's section. And lastly, there's the Sturm, a sub-boss exclusive to Heisenberg's section of the factory. I get what they were going for, but this guy is pretty annoying to fight and doesn't really add anything to the game. Going over to the main boss fights, the 5 main bosses you have consist of the 4 lords and Mother Miranda. Lady Dimitresque boss fight looks cool and doesn't play too bad, but it's definitely not what I would consider a highlight. Despite popular opinion, I really like the little hide-and-seek Benviento fight. Sure, it's not super climactic, but considering how Benviento operates as an antagonist, I thought this was a nice way to defeat her, and it's not too hard to find her. Then there's Monroe. His fight is pretty basic and simplistic. The whole goal is to stay away and shoot the shit out of him, but it's a decent fight. But nothing compares to the fight with Heisenberg. After RE7 took a chill pill, I thought the series was done jumping the shark and going batshit insane, but then Heisenberg's fight happened, and I could not be any more happier. A lot of people complain that they wanted to fight Heisenberg man to man, but how would that work? Heisenberg is basically a metal necromancer. As bizarre as this sounds, I feel like this was the only way these two could have fought, and I think it plays really well. Not only that, but there's a border punching reference thrown in there. Come on. And lastly, there's Mother Miranda. This is definitely not a bad fight by any means. There's multiple stages to make things interesting, and it's a fair and climactic challenge. So yeah, as far as boss fights go, Resident Evil 8 gets a gold star. Overall, I'm happy with the enemy variety in RE8. While there could have definitely been more common enemies to shake things up, the mix of sub-bosses and fun boss fights helped remedy this problem. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about the gameplay out of the way. Now I can get into the nitty-gritty, the story. Oh, there's a good amount to talk about. The story takes place 4 years after the events of Resident Evil 7. After surviving the Baker house, Ethan and Mia have settled down with a new child named Rosemary Winters. But on one calm evening, the house is lit up with bullets and Mia is killed by none other than Chris Redfield. Afterwards, he takes Rosemary, and after Ethan resists, he is knocked out and taken by Chris's squad. However, the bewildered father wakes up, and it's not too long before he finds himself in a European village where the houses are unoccupied and nearly all of the villagers themselves are missing. Except for this one guy. Never mind. Ethan then encounters his first Lycan, and after an onslaught, he learns from a mysterious old woman that Rose is still here and he sets off to find her. Now, I feel like this is a pretty damn good prologue. It comes at you out of nowhere, it builds up suspense, and it leaves you scratching your head at what the hell is going on with Chris Redfield. You really feel like you're Ethan Winters because both of you are the only ones who have no clue what's going on. Speaking of Ethan, can I just say that Ethan is a much more improved character here than in 7? I know, I didn't really play Resident Evil 7, but I did watch every walkthrough of it in existence, and I think that's enough for me to know that Ethan was pretty flat in the previous game. He only talked during critical scenes, and when he did talk, he was pretty average and didn't really leave an impression on me. But with Resident Evil 8, it's a whole different story. Not only does Ethan interact with a variety of different characters, but he shows a wider range of emotion, and you get to see him as an actual person. And the shit he goes through to save his daughter makes you emphasize with him much more. And plus, his cockiness is wonderful.
And I will break you!
Go ahead, do your worst.
I'll use Rose to kill Miranda.
Take Rose? I'd like to see you try. And when I find Miranda, she's a dead woman.
So yeah, Ethan is really good here. Anyways, I'm just going to casually skip over the scene where 6 people die horribly and get straight to the part where we first meet Heisenberg. After that, you get a close-up look at the 4 lords of the village: Alinka Dimitresque, Donna Benviento, Salvatore Monroe, and Carl Heisenberg, who all serve under Mother Miranda. Ethan is thrown into a death trap, but he escapes and meets the Duke. I never understood the love for the merchant in Resident Evil 4, but from this point on, I am the biggest simp for the Duke. The greatest MVP in Resident Evil history. Followed closely by Barry Burton, of course. While I don't like how he leans a little too far into the magical side in a sci-fi horror series, I do love his personality. After that, Ethan ventures into the castle and doesn't make it 2 minutes before he's captured by the 3 daughters of the Metresque, who excitedly brings him before their mother. I guess this is a good time to talk about Dimitrescu as a character. Now, I know most of the popularity surrounding this character is based on her physical features, but I think she's a pretty well-written villain. Of course, presumably being the offspring of a long line of royalty, it would make sense for her ego to be through the roof. Not only that, but she has that snobby rich person attitude that I personally like to see in antagonists. However, while she may come off as two-dimensional, there are some hints to her broader personality. For one, she's really insecure on whether Miranda favors her or not, which works well with the self-image she's made of herself being that of perfection and importance. And two, you actually see her mourn her daughter's death, which shows that while she may be a vile person, she's not completely inhuman and genuinely cares about her children. So yeah, I'm one of the few people out there who likes Dimitrescu for a reason other than her boobs. After Ethan escapes the castle and kills Dimitrescu, he collects a mysterious flask which he then learns from the Duke is the head of his daughter. After Ethan finds the necessary upgrade for a key he just picked up, the Duke informs him that the remaining 3 lords have the other pieces of his daughter, and he'll need to collect her one by one from each of them. This was actually pretty unexpected. I mean, I don't think any of us were expecting a baby to be cut into multiple pieces off screen. However, this does admittedly set up a good reason for Ethan to confront the other lords. So he pays a visit to Benviento's house where he is met with a hallucination of Mia. In this section, we get some foreshadowing to Mia keeping a secret and also a hint that something isn't quite right with Rose. After escaping some nightmare fuel, he kills Benviento and recovers the second flask. Now, despite Benviento's very short screen time, there are some bits and pieces that are given to us that can give us an ideal understanding of the character. As a child, Donna suffered from a mental illness and didn't talk much to anyone. The only person she confided in was Angie, her doll. But after being adopted by Miranda, she mysteriously became a lot happier. This was because of her new power, which allowed her to project whatever image she chooses into her victim's mind using flowers. While definitely the least interesting out of the 4 lords, I would be lying if I said I wasn't interested in her as a character. She seems to have a very sad backstory filled with loss, poor mental health, and manipulation. But Ethan couldn't care less about any of that because next he pays a visit to Monroe, who tries to stop him from leaving his domain. It's also here where we meet Chris for the first time since the prologue, confirming that this village must be extremely important somehow if Chris and his squad are here. I mean, no shit. Monroe attacks and transforms into a giant mutated fish that Ethan has to outrun and kill. While Donna had the most sympathetic backstory, I feel Monroe is the most sympathetic character. Having the least affinity with the Kadu, Monroe has mutated beyond recognition into a grotesque howfish monster. Because of not only his appearance but also his low intelligence, the other 3 lords look down on him and don't take him seriously. However, Monroe easily has the most love and loyalty to Mother Miranda, and he mostly tries his absolute best to make her proud and earn her love and respect, but we as the audience know that Miranda sees him as nothing but a tool that served its purpose and needs to be disposed of. And that's exactly what happens. However, move over Monroe because we're about to meet my favorite villain in the game, Lord Heisenberg. Ethan collects the 3rd flask and is contacted by Heisenberg and instructed to visit his stronghold to retrieve the 4th and final flask. Ethan succeeds and places them in the altar where he is then led to Heisenberg's factory. The 2 meet face to face, and it's here where we learn that Heisenberg is a much more unique character than his other 3 siblings. While they had a blind loyalty to Mother Miranda, Heisenberg sees her for who she truly is and resents her for what she did to him. So with the help of Ethan and his sold-out army, he actually wants to kill Miranda to be free of his servitude. This makes Heisenberg really stand out on his own since he has a much wider plan beyond just killing Ethan. In fact, he couldn't really care less about Ethan. It's only after he refuses Heisenberg's offer to team up that he is viewed as a potential detriment to his plan and therefore must be dealt with. Speaking of which, I've seen a lot of Let's Players say Ethan was dumb to refuse the offer, but if some psychotic stranger who's tried to kill you once before came up to you and wanted to use your infant child as a murder weapon, you wouldn't be too keen on joining that person. But yeah, Heisenberg's depth, mixed with his jocular and laid-back personality, mixed with how downright psychotic and unempathetic he is, makes him a pretty memorable character. And his power over metal is sick from a design standpoint, especially since no other character in the world of Resident Evil has had this power. And for those of you who say Heisenberg's meta manipulation is too out of place for Resident Evil, this is the same series of shape-shifting leeches and villains who shoot literal fire out of their hands. We're past the point of no return. So Ethan makes it to the facility and nearly reaches the exit when he's confronted by Heisenberg, who mutates before him into a giant metallic monster. Ethan is sent all the way back down the factory, and it's here where he meets Chris Redfield once more, who finally explains what's been going on. The Mia Winters we saw in the prologue was actually Mother Miranda, who has the power of mimicry. She can shapeshift and mimic whoever she wants. Chris came to the Winters' house to eliminate Miranda before she could get her hands on Rose, but Miranda pretended to be dead, crashed the vehicle Ethan was in, and took off with Rose. Chris also explains the reason he wasn't transparent from the start was because he knew Ethan would want to be involved and didn't want a civilian getting in the way. I could buy this, except for the fact that there would be no way Ethan could get involved if he wanted to, because he would be presumably guarded by agents in some sort of facility. But if Chris had explained, we wouldn't have a plot twist. And plus, later on, Chris realizes it was a dumb decision not to tell Ethan the truth from the start, so I can excuse it. Chris heads off to regroup with his squad, while Ethan hops on one of Heisenberg's scrapped tanks recently repaired by Chris that is made out of a metal polymer composite, which Heisenberg can't control. Ethan takes an elevator and enters an intense battle of Heisenberg. Ethan is able to defeat him, but right after, he is met by Mother Miranda, who explains to him that she needs Rose for the ceremony she has planned. After said ceremony, Rose will be reborn as Miranda's lost daughter, Ava. Ethan is determined to not let this happen, but Miranda quickly rips out his heart and samples his blood. Chris, having heard everything over the phone, has his suspicions confirmed when Ethan is confirmed dead by a member of his squad. Determined to avenge Ethan and put a stop to this whole Mutamyces saga, Chris and his squad fight their way to Mother Miranda. Can I just say that this is easily my favorite climax in any Resident Evil games? Things went from 0 to 100 in a satisfying way, and seeing the whole village get torn apart as what remains of the Lycan Horde attempt to stop you in your tracks just makes this such an epic finale. Chris finds himself in Mother Miranda's lab where he learns about the scientific explanations for each lord, and finds out some stunning revelations. It turns out that Oswald E. Spencer was actually one of Miranda's students, and inspired by her goals to get Ava back, he set out to improve the human condition and would later go on to start Umbrella, giving birth to the entire series. When most games have blatant retcons like this, particularly long-running series, it usually comes off as forced or lazy. But here, it actually doesn't feel that way. It makes sense within the universe, and it's actually a really cool origin of Spencer's goals. It even turns out that the Umbrella logo was inspired by a marking in a cave, which is sick. But that's not the only revelation. It also turns out that Evelyn, from RE7, was a failed attempt at replicating Ava, which is just fucking awesome. It helps Resident Evil 8 feel much more like a sequel to 7, and it adds more cool lore to the series. I gotta say, the writers for this game did a good job at connecting this game to the overall narrative of the series as a whole. After this, Chris comes face to face with the real Mia and he informs her of Ethan's death, but she reveals that Ethan is a little more special than one might assume. And just like that, we take control of Ethan Winters once more inside of a dreamlike space, which is the mental environment where all of the consciousness of each individual infected with the Mutamyces is stored upon death. He is met by Evelyn, who drops the biggest bombshell in the game. Ethan is in fact dead, but not by Miranda. He's been dead ever since the 7th game, ever since Jack Baker knocked him out. This entire time, his body has been composed of mold, which explains why all of his injuries, while painful, has never had a permanent effect on him. This plot twist was genuinely completely unexpected, and yet it makes a whole lot of sense when you take in the new information this game has provided us with thus far. Ethan comes to, and the Duke was once again a complete MVP, and gives Ethan a lift to Mother Miranda. And the two of them part ways.
Please, be well. Thanks.
Then Ethan confronts Mother Miranda, who's failed at reviving Ava, and the two have an epic showdown ending with Miranda dematerializing into nothing but shards of crystal. Ethan himself is not looking too good once Chris arrives, and Chris attempts to escort him out of here, but with his body falling apart, Ethan knows he's a goner. He leaves Rose his jacket, tells Chris to teach her to be strong, and separates from the two. He takes his life to end the threat of the Megamyces once and for all. Back at the helicopter, they lift off and Mia is told about her husband's brave sacrifice. Afterwards, it turns out that our old pals at the BSAA have gone fully corrupt and are sending the dead to fight their battles. With the story wrapped up and a leading hook for the next mainline game being established, the story comes to a close. But not before we see a glimpse of the future of Rosemary visits her father's grave, closely monitored by special agents because of her powers. And that was Resident Evil Village's story. I think Capcom outdid themselves this time around for sure. Where do I start? For one, the pacing of the story is really good. There's rarely any downtime and it doesn't go by too fast. The characters, mostly the villains, are all written great. There's a lot of depth behind each villain, they all vary in terms of personality and design. The lore Resident Evil Village introduces is definitely critical to the overall story going forward, and the way it ties into other games is awesome. And Ethan's death was handled beautifully, and this game has solidified him as a memorable Resident Evil protagonist. Overall, the story of Resident Evil Village is amongst my favorite in the series, and I commend Capcom for their writing. So yeah, I fucking love Resident Evil Village. The game takes the RE formula and makes necessary tweaks to turn it into a solid action game. There's a huge amount of content to unlock which definitely warrants that $60 price tag, and the story is amazing. This might very well be my favorite Resident Evil game ever made. Code Veronica X and RE2 Remake are good runner-ups, but Code Veronica has a few annoying things about it, and RE2 Remake is a much smaller game overall. So yeah, I am saying that I personally think Resident Evil Village is the best Resident Evil game ever made. Not only that, but it has my vote for Game of the Year. Not that it matters. I'll be around to cover Resident Evil Reverse, so look out for that, whenever the heck that comes out. Before I end, I just want to thank Capcom for their work on this game. I've had a blast playing it.